Well, it says that we're live. So the best thing I can always do is trust that we are live and welcome you into This Life Matters. My name is Drew. I am one of the hosts of This Life Matters. Next to me is my lovely co-host, Gigi. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It is, St. Patrick's Day here. I got my green t-shirt on. I got some green earrings on. So, I'm doing good.
I it is it's not a part of my life anymore, and I completely forgot. Like I told my wife this morning, I was like, I think it's St. Patrick's Day. And I realized I don't actually own much green. I don't think I have anything green
Yeah,
currently at
I
all.
had a
That's
hard time.
yeah. So today on This Life Matters, this whole month or this whole season, we've dedicated ourselves to talk more about cultural competency, to talk about leaning into some of these spaces of getting a better understanding. And we've promised to be more real with one another and have harder, tougher conversations. Today is going to be another one of those conversations that's going to be a little bit tough to have because we want to do two things today. We want to first acknowledge something that is, hurting us as a community. And then we want to kind of talk about how we got there from our perspectives, how things have kind of been the way that they've been. So we want to talk about the violence that has happened toward uh, that's been targeting people in the Asian community. Um, and this is a difficult conversation because we love we love the freedoms that we have in this country, but we also know some of the hardship that comes along with, when these type of things happen in our country. We have to speak out and we have to say things to support our brothers and sisters that may not look like us, or may not, come from the same backgrounds or whatnot. But in this particular case, there are a lot of Asian Americans that are being attacked, and a lot have been attacked since the beginning of the COVID pandemic. And so this community has been unfairly targeted as the source of COVID. And there have been people who have thought that they need to take revenge on them. There have been people just looking to, I don't know, just vent their frustrations. I don't know what it is, but they have taken the hate that they have in their heart and they have targeted toward our Asian brothers and sisters. And today we just want to acknowledge that this is a real thing, that this, like there are media outlets and different people who are trying to gaslight the community and just saying that these things that are happening are isolated incidents, that there is nothing negative that is going on. But we know this to not be the truth. With this most recent incident that happened in Atlanta, some news outlets are describing it as, an individual who he targeted these communities due to his sex addiction. But, that's not the common thread that we see that, amongst things that like the attack that just happened in Oakland last week. So we're seeing these things happen more frequently. And we just want to acknowledge that it is real and it is something that is going on in America, and we have the power to do something about it.
It is
Gigi?
very disturbing. It is very disturbing to hear reports of what's going on. I don't know where I live, if I've heard of any reports personally like that. So what I'm seeing and hearing is mainly on the news. And so I'm wondering about, personally, I'm wondering why, if people are Americans and we live in America, okay, why would anyone decide to take it out on someone who looks like they think someone from China looks because someone said that's the China virus? It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't compute to me why that happens, and why all the hatred. But we can look through all of history, and it has always been that if someone doesn't look like us, doesn't sound like us, doesn't make the same choices that we do, um, doesn't live in the same community, even that there's this rivalry that's so intense. And uh, even though I grew up in a time that, I was born in 1950, I'll just say it. So it was after World War II. And what happened to the Japanese population in America during all that time, we look at it now and think, how could this happen? How in the world could this happen? But it did happen, and it's still happening with other people who are coming into the United States from our southern border. It's still happening. So this is not something that our conversation, I think, or anyone's conversation is going to ever completely change. This has been going on. You look at all over the world. I remember when I was in Europe, I was in Germany. No, I was in Austria. And it was in the 80s. And I got in the middle of a riot scene at the time, and they were rioting against, they called them gypsies. They were the Romanian people that were coming into that country. And I got caught up. I was walking down the street with a friend. We were visiting there. It was kind of the scariest thing that I ever was in at the time. And there was a loudspeaker going off with this male voice that I was thinking, this has to be how Jewish people in Germany thought when they heard these loudspeaker things going off and they were being rounded up. People had to be so afraid. There's this fear of the other, fear of this unknown, fear of something different from us. It's a hatred. It's a poison. It's what I think about it.
Yeah. I think, there's been a history, like you said, there's a history that we've seen. And as I collect comics and I do research on comic books for the film that I'm working on, I found that, post-war, and even during the war, even the comic book industry did a lot to further this perception of of the Asian population being dehumanized. And so there are some terms that kind of sprung up we don't use anymore, thank God, but that were commonplace in comic books, that were commonplace even in some textbooks. There were things that we've had to unlearn for a long because once you other someone, what you're really doing is you're taking them out of, you're dehumanizing them. And so the efforts to come back together and reconcile with our brothers and sisters is a serious effort. I take a look at, back just in recent history, after 9/11, the more patriotic view is for us to remember 9/12 and 9/15, those days when everyone just got together and it was beautiful. But we forget, by the time October rolled around, anyone who had, a turban on, or anyone who, had looked as though they were from the Middle East, they were targeted. And
Mhm.
so this is, I think people, it comes from a space of fear. It comes from a space of wanting to be a part of, like, I want to do my part. I want to be patriotic. And you can't mimic, what the military does. What they do is training is something special. But when you try to mimic that military kind of mindset, it causes these type of reactions sometimes as well. And so I think, you know, it also depends on another thing that I've witnessed amongst listening to stories from veterans down through the years who were in the homeless population. A lot of Vietnam veterans came back with certain biases because they suffered at the hands of people, and due to just it being war, and they come back with a bias which is taught to the next generation. So when you have parents who were in World War II, in the Korean War, in Vietnam, you begin to come back and you have some of this language, some of these things to be, they can be passed down. And I think we're in a status now where it's time for us to stop, um, all of that madness. And on a personal note, um, did you have something you want to say? Because before I go into like how I could, okay. So on a personal note, one of the things, the biases that I've had that roots from not war, but from a trauma that just a community trauma that took place and takes place, is I've always looked at the very nature of the relationship that um, our community, when a community is gentrified or when a community is taken over, especially from a business standpoint, there's a certain level of fear and resentment. So for me, some of the first times that I had that moment of being Black in a store didn't come at the hands of, let's just say, a white store owner following me around or a white store owner treating me a certain way. The businesses that were in my neighborhood were all usually Asian owned. And so the whole, like, the trope, and I'm gonna say it in just my normal tone of voice, but the hurry up and buy, that's real. That's something I heard my whole entire life. And I think after Natasha, I can't remember her last name, but she was killed right before the LA riots. That was like a combination of the community boiling over, being angry, but it also showed the amount of fear and how, like, that this group of people have to live in. So to the point that when they're in a community, they're always on guard because the community has never fully welcomed them and fully really found a way to reconcile with them. And so it's a difficult relationship. Um I own a hair business, and majority of the black hair business is owned by Koreans. And trying to mend those relationships and deal with those relationships well. And like when I walk around the store, like trying to remind them, hey, me, I spend a lot of money here. Um, those are tough. It's tough, but I can't treat everyone in that community the same. So I'm trying to undo, and it's just me being honest and about it. I am trying to undo some of that within me, um, one step at a time, and figuring out how I can do better to not be angry, but to empathize and to see things from their vantage point and to still stand in the gap and support them despite what I may have experienced, as a result of the hate that is in the atmosphere in general.
That's interesting that you brought that up about the past, how the past informs what we do now. And I think that has a lot to do with it. No matter, who it was in our life that maybe we thought wronged us or hurt us or we were afraid of, those are deeply implanted in our brain and in our psyche, in our soul. And so I think that does inform some of what goes on with people. But I think we need to realize that and kind of float back in our minds and think about times that maybe we did have experiences from a person who was something different, someone different from us. And so that would be culturally, ethnically, uh, philosophy, beliefs, whatever they are. Float back, year after year in your mind, spend a little time doing that and figure out, okay, what are my triggers here? And Andrew just said what his trigger was about this. And so you recognize them and you're aware of them, and maybe you can come to terms with that was that person. That was maybe one person. It could have been a group of people, but it could have been a situation. I know my husband talks sometimes about in junior high, a certain population of students that, he was in school with. One of the things they liked to do was spit on people. And I remember many years ago, many years ago, we were walking out of a mall and it was at night. We were walking and these three boys behind us came out and spit at my husband on it, like on it, landed on his hair. They were not of the same ethnicity, even of the kids in junior high school. He went ballistic. It was a trigger. And it wasn't even about the same ethnicity. It was about an act. So I'm wondering if that's something that we could all do is we float, but we call it in counseling, we call it floating back. And you have to be really quiet and still when you do this. And so you think of an incident and you think of that. And then you think, well, something earlier in my life. And you kind of, and you know how when you think of certain things, they'll just remind you of something else. That's what floating back is. And maybe floating back and seeing where is it that I particularly got that idea or a situation hurt and what that was like. And so we can realize, okay, just because something like that might happen from a certain population of people doesn't mean that we could have to lump everybody in that. And one of the things, as we've been thinking and talking about this today, I was thinking, I wonder what other people in these other populations of people that I'm not in think about me. What do they think about me as a white woman of my age? Where I live? I don't know. I mean, that would be a hard question to ask someone, you know, because Andrew and I talk about this. We talk about, when we first met, we didn't know each other. We maybe had some preconceived ideas about each other, but we got to know each other.
Yeah.
And we know each other now. We know our heart. We know our mind. We know what we think about each other. We know how we view the world. What's our worldview? That's one of the things that we talked about in our last show, is we need to figure out what our own worldview is about people, cultures. I mean, everybody, as Andrew said, we love to visit Europe, okay? And I can say I've had no interest in visiting some of the Asian countries. Part of it is because I don't want to fly that long to go visit, But there's other parts of Asia that are not. I think when people say Asia, they're thinking of Vietnamese, Japanese, Korean, things like that, not India. I'd love to go to India. I don't really want to fly that far to do that. But so I think this calls on us to do some self-examination and see where are we getting our bias and how do we want to let this continue to inform us as we mature.
Yeah, I absolutely. When I talk to a lot of people who are dealing with their xenophobia, it's typically toward countries we've had some sort of battle with. We've had some sort of war with since the inception. Since the United States has really, since the inception of the United States, we don't go long without being at war with someone, and so it's and that's just our history. That's just the reality of it, and so. I think that's where most people's xenophobia comes from. Like it's rooted in the space of mom or dad or grandpa or someone served in the military. And we have a rich tradition of holding our country safe from that population. And I think the othering that kind of comes in with Black people, it really just comes in with the covering, as I would assess it, the covering up of a sin. Like the not wanting to deal with the hard part of slavery, that type of thing. So when we other other people, part of the othering process, and you hit on this earlier, it's so important when you're working through the process of undoing how you've othered groups, is say their names, like really point out the factor that there is a difference, a huge difference between individuals who are from Korea and individuals that are from there's a difference between North Korea and South Korea. But then you take China, Korea, Japan, these are not the same places. And then the often forgotten, Pacific Islanders, the individuals who are living in the islands, totally different cultures. And some of the only things that some of these cultures there's may have in common is, the fact that they had maybe been at war with the United States at some point, or been, or some of the common factors is they've been colonized at some point. And so we may find one of our churches, on one of their islands, or we may have taken their country, like Hawaii, but I think what ultimately happens is that it's easier for us to kind of just say, that's them, we're us, we're sticking together, instead of taking a full world view. Because a world view is just a harder view to take, to view things as a full, and the preacher in me would say it this way, to view the full kingdom of God is a little bit harder than, it's a lot easier just to view your denomination, your church, but the full view of all of God's creation and treating and your brothers and sisters in a loving way, that's the point of us doing this show. We have our little show, we have our voices in this world. And I feel like the point of what we're saying today is that we come in knowing that we may have some preconceived biases, but we're doing our work on them. We acknowledge them. We're not keeping it there just because a lot of times we pat ourselves on the back and we stay somewhere just because we able to name it. But we're choosing to say we're going to go a step further and move away from this in any ways that we see it. And I love the question that you kind of posed to yourself, Gigi. How am I seen by other cultures? And what potentially could be informing that culture about my culture? I understand as an African American that the rest of the world sees, something totally different. And I'm gonna say this for educational purposes, and I'm sorry if it offends you, but I understand there's a bias that the rest of the world, when they think of African Americans, a lot of times they see niggas opposed to actual Black men and women, or actual Americans, or whatever they identify as. They see that derogatory term. They see the stereotypes. It's so much beautiful culture involved in this lumping word that we use in Asia. Like we say Asians, because it's just the general continent. But what breaks down the beauty of each of those individual cultures, as we get to know those cultures and know those people as individuals, I think we'll begin to celebrate that beauty and move away from it. When I moved here to Portland, it was an Asian family, or not family so much, but there was an Asian pastor, was one of the first people that welcomed us into their home. And it helped change our life. Also, one of the first Koreans that I was able to sit down with and love, like, and find something other, I was able to remove myself away from the hurry up and buy, the can I help you find something, the, all the things that kind of have gone down through the years of, me having to walk, when I walked into the beauty supply store, you empty your pockets first. You can't bring your backpack in. That, that it kind of helped to have someone that just be like, oh, okay, they're all like, it helps. So getting to know my neighbor and loving my neighbor has helped me undo the effects of the traumas of the past.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if people could love the people of all the food groups that we all love? I mean, wouldn't that be something?
Yeah, Yeah, we always love the culture. Like we love the culture, but don't love the people. Like, yeah.
People.
And that's,
Yeah.
yeah, because, but you know what's so funny about that? Think about how every group is kind of almost represented, because even American, so to speak, food is, your typical hamburger, steaks, hot dog. That's appreciated in different places,
Yeah.
Um, we as Americans don't even appreciate what's considered to be American food that much, probably because we see the result of what it does to our bodies.
Well,
But we, yeah, just to have a greater appreciation for those that we've othered and the contributions of beauty that they have given to this world is just, we got to participate. We got to learn to dive in and share each other's art, acknowledge what pain our culture has placed on other people, what traumas have our culture placed on others. Acknowledge it. It's okay to apologize. It's okay I think apologies sometimes can be the first step in really being repentive toward your actions and changing and doing something different, you know?
yeah. The first time I met you, Andrew, you were wearing I didn't know you. It was kind of in a dark location where we were getting ready to do this radio show. There you were wearing your orange vest as a City of Tulsa worker.
Right, right. Yeah.
And what was I to think here? I came in and I thought, well, okay, what's going on here? You know, uh, here is this young man, and he's at this recording booth. Wait a minute, he's wearing an orange vest from the City of Tulsa. It was like, what's going on here? This was incongruent. It didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
And of course, you're very quiet when you're not on air, and so it was a little hard to figure out who Andrew was, who Drew is, for a while, and no telling what he thought about me. Go ahead and say, I want to hear.
I wish I could say that I remember in that much detail. I think, and here's one of the reasons why I say that, and it's not to strip you of the individuality of the relationship. Going into those situations as like a young black man, you go into certain situations and you do lump and you do gather. So I was going to go meet, for lack of a better term, just to break it down by race, I'm going to go meet a couple of white people who need me to do work, who need me to work for them and do something. I'm in a position, in a place in my life at that point where it's like, hey, this could be another opportunity for me to further my dreams and work on the things I need to work on. And so the individualism is kind of stripped away. Like sometimes there's this assumption from like that the minority cultures get lumped, but because you can say Asian and you can point to a continent, you could say European, you could say African, and point to these locations. With black and white, it's a racial concept, that's kind of constructed here for the sake of racism. So you kind of just, so for me to lump you into like, I'm just meeting with a couple of white people, it's weird, but that's the structure of how it works. It's like, and it's ingrained in us to put people in these particular categories. And so I was just like, we'll see, we'll see how it goes. And so once I got to know uh everyone involved at the time, and then as time evolved and it was just me and you, I was like, okay, then I got to know the person of Gigi, and I was like, she's different. The Southern drawl, all the different things that would normally, like those Okiisms, cause people to just, we've talked about this a few episodes ago. Okiisms will stop a person at the door and assume that like if you have a Southern drawl, people will think automatically you're racist or your country or you're something, like there's never like pride built in with an accent. And you were one of the first people that I just thought, you know what, this is a good thing. I remember taking notes and saying, I'm going to tell her to lean into this. She needs to lean into this. And I did. I always, and I still do. Don't be ashamed of the Okiisms. Don't be ashamed of the Southern drawl. Lean into it. It's a part of the charm and the personality of who you are, because there's no hatred behind it. There's nothing behind it. So, yeah, that was my first impression. It was just kind of like work to some extent. And I think having that head down survivalist mentality, you don't get a chance to judge anyone beyond their physical description. Now, when I meet clients, I do assess them according to how you just say, like, I put a full humanity strip of humanity on them. They're not a dollar sign. It's like, hey, who are you? Because I don't want to associate my brand and who I am as a creator with someone who's a horrible person. So no matter how much they're paying me, I'm not going to work for them.
The other thing, when I came in to meet you, I was the newbie. I looked at you as the professional, and you probably didn't know that.
I wasn't dressed like the professional, nor, and let me say this as we kind of, as long as we're kind of reminiscent about what it was like to overcome our biases, I wasn't, like you pointed this out a minute ago, I wasn't dressed as the professional. I was not, I was dressed as a person who was just filling potholes hours before. And that's the reality of of the space of what happens when you get a chance to lay down your biases and say, I'm going to give each human a chance to show me the full scope of their humanity. I'm going to go in and actually enjoy getting to know the scope of their humanity. Like, that's the most important thing. And like we were talking earlier about, that was one of I'm saying that to you now in a space of maturity. That's one of the hardest things for us to talk about and to get into. That has been one of the hardest things for us to get into when we talk about the Asian community. Like, for me, I came in with the bias, like from those past experiences. So when I start to meet like now I'm in a group, I'm a part of something called Voices. And there are leaders of color from all over the world. I actually was in Tampa a couple of years ago, and we had this session just about, Black and Asian communities coming together and overcoming the biases. And it was difficult for me to step into that room and say, all right, I'm gonna see everyone for who they are. I'm not gonna assume that everyone is thinking the worst of me. But as a Black man, I do tend to think, going into most rooms, that everyone's thinking the worst of me. So therefore, I have to be perfect. I have to do everything right in order to overcome, because I always feel like I'm starting negative 10 points. And that's the hardest part. So where instead of usually seeing my brothers and sisters in the Asian community as allies, I believe that they've assimilated to the American misperception of Blackness. And I am now having to start to say, okay, I need to back down off of that and give everybody a chance. Maybe they don't see me this way. And I'm also matured enough in this space in my life now where I actually don't care what you think about me. I'm going to supersede your expectations. So, but I'm glad you brought that up. I never really thought about, never thought about what we thought about each other. I wish I had a more in-depth answer. Well, that's about our close to our time. We can, once we get going, we can always keep going, but we try to keep it short for the most part because we know we could keep going. So, well, what do we always say?
Well, what do you always say?
I always say, hate can't drive out hate. Only love can do that. And we absolutely love you and thank you for watching us and listening to us. No matter how you're getting this, we love you. And Gigi, what is it that you say?
I always say our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Martin Luther King.
All right. And we will see you next time on This Life Matters.
That's right. Bye.